And on Wednesday, the Vatican's first abuse trial concluded. And the German Synodal Path takes an alarming turn. Joining me to discuss this and much more is the Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic Register, Edward Pentin. Ed, thanks for being here. Father Gabriele Martinelli was acquitted of charges of violent sexual assault alleged to have taken place at the Pius X pre-seminary in Rome between 2006 and 2012. Now, that's the seminary inside the walls of the Vatican. The school's former rector, Father Enrico Radici, was cleared of charges of cover-up. Now, a judge did find that Father Martinelli, who was a former altar boy who served the Pope, had actually engaged in a sexual relationship with a slightly younger peer during his time at the pre-seminary. But they claimed there was no evidence of coercion. The court also found evidence of another crime, corruption of a minor, but said that the statutes of limitations had expired by 4 years when the lawsuit was filed in 2018. What's been the reaction to all of this in Rome, to these rulings by the Vatican court?
Well, it's been quite muted, really, Raymond, because a lot of it's been overshadowed by the big financial trial, which is going on at the same time. But I think there was a certain amount of surprise. I think the Vatican prosecutors wanted to hand down sentences of 2 to 4 years, I believe, to each of them. But as they came to their conclusions, they realized that, or at least the judge realized that there wasn't enough evidence, as you said, and it wasn't enough to punish them. So I think generally, the reaction is, well, they've accepted that verdict, and there isn't much more to say about this case than what's already been said in the verdict. But certainly it's of concern, because this pre-seminary, I think, has had problems in the past. It's had some criticisms about the behavior of some of the people within it, and the Pope, in fact, has moved it from inside the Vatican to outside the Vatican. He did that, I think, last year. And so that steps have been taken to try to clean it up. But certainly there's some not so good things going on there, which are of some concern, I think.
Well, the other concerning thing here, Ed, is many Vatican officials, including Pope Francis, had received written warning of a potential crime taking place by Martinelli at that pre-seminary beginning in 2013. However, the Vatican only brought indictments against Martinelli and Radici 6 years later, after a surge of Italian media coverage. Reports have detailed how Martinelli, who's now 29, had risen to the priesthood with the help of prelates who brushed off those initial accusations and conducted only cursory investigations. What does this say about the Vatican's promises to crack down on abuse? And why the kind of ho-hum attitude over having sex with another seminarian, coerced or not?
Well, exactly. And this has been a criticism for some time of the Vatican and the hierarchy, that when it comes to the relations between sort of consenting, these weren't adults, but consenting adults, then it all seems to be okay. So, yeah, there is that concern that this is being brushed under the carpet a little bit too easily, that there are, as I said earlier, serious problems within the pre-seminary, but also in the way this case was dealt with, which haven't really been addressed. And but I think once this big financial trial is over, I think people or the media might return to this case and look at it in more detail, I expect.
Mm-hmm. Moving on to that other trial you mentioned a moment ago at the Vatican, the largest financial criminal trial in the history of the Catholic Church is now taking place. The chief defendant is Cardinal Angelo Becciu. Now, until 2019, he had been one of the city-state's most powerful clerics, the sostituto, the substitute. Becciu directed the Vatican's day-to-day operations. All of this concerns a London property deal, which saw a 350 million euro investment turn into a 100 million euro loss for the Vatican. With this trial, Pope Francis has signaled that he's serious about cleaning up the Vatican's finances. However, a recent report in Forbes magazine suggests that there's much drama behind the scenes, and that among new revelations are that, quote, the Pope received a damning briefing about Cardinal Becciu, now on trial years before he was indicted, yet let him remain in his position. Francis approved the raid that suddenly pitted the Vatican's prosecutors against its financial watchdog. An outside director says he attempted to meet with Francis to warn him about the approaching legal catastrophe and was blocked. Insiders use the term friends of Francis to explain why some Vatican officials are being prosecuted and others aren't. Who decides, Ed, who gets prosecuted in a Vatican court?
Well, it's really the job of the promoter of justice, the Vatican prosecutors, who conducted a 2-year investigation before this trial took place. And they believe that the 10 that they've indicted are the ones that most guilty. But I spoke actually today to the deputy prosecutor who did a lot of the investigations. And he said, in fact, that Cardinal Becciu was not originally on the list of those to be investigated. But because he interfered with the investigation so much, they included him in the list of indictments. So it's all a bit difficult to know exactly how they came to these indictments and the sort of evidence that they chose. And in fact, that's one of the criticisms of the defense, that they haven't actually been questioned. And that came up at this hearings yesterday and the day before yesterday. And in fact, they want to know, why weren't they questioned before the trial took place? Why weren't those recordings of their interrogations recorded for the trial? And so that's why this has been adjourned, one of the reasons at least, until November the 17th, I believe.
Mm-hmm. And surely Cardinal Becciu's boss at the time, Cardinal Parolin, the Vatican Secretary of State, that he would have had some knowledge of this deal.
Yes, I mean, certainly he seems to have known about it and had quite a lot to do with it. But yes, I think there's certain characters within this certain figures rather, who haven't been called to testify yet. But I think we may see that happen, and that we may see Cardinal Parolin and maybe a few others being indicted, or at least summoned to the court to give evidence.
Mm-hmm. In the Forbes report, Mark Odnall, who is a board member of the Vatican's financial watchdog, also known as the Vatican's Financial Information Authority, he resigned following the raid in 2019 of the Vatican financial offices. He said, quote, "The person responsible for this is the Pope. He has made the wrong decisions and appointed the wrong people, all the while pretending he is fighting against bad people," end quote. Is that a wider sentiment surrounding this trial in Rome and in Italy?
Well, I mean, one's heard over the past year or two that all of what happened in this terrible London deal that went wrong, that everybody knew about it from top to bottom, from the very top right down to the lowest official who was involved in it. And so I think certain fingers will be pointed at the Pope about this, and how much did he know, and when did he know it? And I think he won't be called to trial, of course, but I think there are questions about what he knew and how much he allowed this to go forward. And now a lot of this started, I think, before he became Pope. I think the original deal happened, I think, in 2012 or 2011. And so I think there wasn't, he can't blame him for that, but I think it was the way it was handled afterwards, of course, where the losses were made. And we really don't know how much he knew. But certainly those higher up, whether it was Cardinal Becciu or perhaps his replacement, Archbishop Pena, I think they seem to know a lot about the actual deal, as well as Cardinal Parolin, of course.
As you alluded to a moment ago, this trial is not going so well. On Wednesday, the president of the tribunal, Giuseppe Pinatone, ruled that the prosecutors had deprived 10 defendants of their rights and ordered prosecutors to turn over key pieces of evidence and redo their investigation for some of these suspects. He said that there have been, quote, lamentable violations by the Pope's prosecutors in failing to give suspects the chance to respond to the accusations and during that preliminary phase of the investigation. Now, prosecutors have to redo their entire investigations. How long will this take? And what does this look like to you, Ed?
Well, I mean, they've only got a month to do it. I think their deadline is early November, where they've got to really submit submit all the evidence which they hadn't submitted, which they were supposed to have deposited at the court by August 9th, and they didn't do it. So they've got to do that by November. But I think there are various other things as well, which are lots of concerns about. as well as the fact I was speaking, as I said earlier, with Alessandro Didi, who's the deputy prosecutor in all of this, and he says actually that that the laws of the Vatican actually don't demand that these interrogations take place before the trial. And he said that he's never known it happen before. So he was basically following the rules set in place for Vatican trials, and he feels that he hadn't done anything wrong. And so he was quite surprised when this was these complaints came to his door. So he's going to go along with it, but as I say, I think they're basically going by the rules, and so they're not so happy with this. But of course, it's very good for the defence. It gives them a chance to see all the evidence and to be questioned. It certainly gives them a chance to, or it gives their lawyers a chance to strengthen their cases. So it does work very much in their favour, I think.
There are a lot of moving parts and backstage intrigues in this story. I would direct people to your reporting on this and the Forbes piece this week, which was kind of, a flyover. You wrote a piece about how concerned German Catholics are about the direction of that German synodal way. They've published a reform initiative opposing the controversial synodal path. They argue that the abuse crisis that triggered this synodal path has been used in order to implement, quote, a well-known political ecclesiastical agenda. How widespread are these concerns?
It's hard to say, Raymond. I mean, certainly there's a sort of groundswell of opinion, I think, among certain faithful in Germany who have been rather silent until now, and I think they're speaking up, and they've just really had enough of it. I think they feel that it's going too far. Certainly since the big meeting this week with the Synodal Path, where they all assembled in Frankfurt for the second time of the Synodal Path, they realized that there's a lot that they're pushing through, a lot of radical programs, and they just don't like it. They want it to be faithful to the Church's tradition and teaching, and they think that it's basically been hijacked by a group of radicals who are intent on changing the Church through this process. And what I think disturbs them particularly is that they want to make this binding, that they want this to be really set in stone, these changes, which they voted on this week about how they wanted to have blessings for same-sex unions, and even called in the existence of the priesthood. They wanted to debate whether the priesthood was needed. People think, well, you couldn't really make it up. It's just gone way over the top, and I think that's what these lay faithful think. And so they've set up a website. They're quite well organized, and I think we may well hear more of them as time goes, from them as time goes on.
Yeah, and we should note, Pope Francis has warned them about these blessings for same-sex unions. There was a letter that went to the German bishops, but they seem to be sort of looking the other way. I mean, they voted that they'd like to explore opening up all kinds of, not only the priesthood and whether the priesthood should exist in its current form, but blessings for same-sex unions as well. And given these results and the votes, are German bishops concerned that this might spark a split from Rome? And will extending this synod to 2023 help change the so-called progressive views here?
Yes. Well, I've heard from a group of anonymous Germans, they don't want to be named, but I'm going to put this out hopefully tomorrow, that they're very concerned that the bishops, particularly, I think that they say that the majority of the bishops, not the big majority, but most of them, are deeply disturbed by this, but they're so scared about it all, they're afraid to actually speak up. And so you only have a very small number, like the Bishop of Regensburg and Cardinal Volki, until he was banished until March because of the situation in Cologne. But yes, so there are some bishops who really want to complain, but they don't stand up to it. And I think by extending it to 2023, this is probably going to go in the favor of those who are trying to push the radical agenda. I don't think that's going to. I think it's going to harm their program. At least that's how it seems to me. It seems that it'll give them a chance to really push through their programs.
Yeah, and as you've reported, Cardinal Walter Kasper, certainly no radical traditionalist, has wondered whether the synodal path of the Church of Germany is entirely Catholic. He supports a counterproposal made by the Bishop of Regensburg. What is that counterproposal?
Yes, well, the counterproposal is very similar, really, to what the lay group are doing. It's really to bring back the synod back to being faithful to the Church's teaching and tradition. And they put out a paper regarding one of the forums about authority and power in the Church, and basically it upholds the current structure of the hierarchy, which the Synodal Path really wants to overturn. And so it's very much keeping in line with the magisterium of the Church and keeping it faithful to her teaching. And to have Cardinal Kasper give words of support to that is, as you say, quite interesting and unexpected. But he is genuinely concerned about it. He sees the German Synodal Path as being very different to the Pope's idea of synodality, and he sees it really as going off on a tangent and really not being controlled and not, as we say, not being faithful to tradition. But as Cardinal Kasper says, he doesn't believe it's even faithful to the Second Vatican Council either.
There's also the case, and you mentioned him earlier, the Cardinal of Cologne, who is the only other major synod critic here. Now, my understanding, what I've read in the reports, is that it looks like Pope Francis has placed him on sabbatical until March, when the synod is over. What's going on here?
Yes, well, at least the synod was supposed to end in February 2022, February next year, but now it's been extended to 2023. And that might explain why I think a lot of Cardinal Volki's opponents within the Synodal Path, and there were many, were very disappointed that he wasn't asked to resign and his resignation accepted by the Pope, because now he can come back in March and be a critic again, a very vocal critic of the Synodal Path. And so it does give him that chance. But it did seem as though, until this Synodal Path is extended, that he was basically put into the long grass, as it were, until the Synodal Path was going to be finished in February, which of course would have been very convenient for those pushing the agendas.
Yeah, well, this collision course between the German Church and Rome is certainly coming. I mean, they are completely ignoring Pope Francis's guidance on this and going on their own way. They may have to keep going if they continue. At the Vatican on Monday, the Feast of St. Francis, faith leaders and scientists who support climate change met to formally call the international community to protect the environment ahead of that UN climate change conference set for the end of the month. In his address, which was handed out but not read to save time, Pope Francis underlined three concepts that could shed light, quote, on our effort to care for our common home: openness to interdependence and sharing, the dynamism of love, and the call to respect. And he stressed this: everything is interconnected. The world must come together not only to realize the harmful effects of human action, but also identify behaviors and solutions. How do you think this message and this event, Ed, have been received?
So I think he was really wanting to push this agenda, the COP26 agenda, which is this UN conference on climate change, which is taking place in Glasgow at the end of the month. And I think he was wanting to the Pope was really wanting to show that he supports this, and get these other faith leaders also to back it. And it does seem to have been, I think, for those who are organising it, I think they were very, very happy with this. But as I say, it brought together 40 faith leaders, 33 came to Rome for it, and they signed this appeal really to try and get nations to step up their action against climate change. But I thought what was interesting about this meeting was that they didn't include any of those who were skeptical voices of climate change, and in fact they thought it would complicate it, so they didn't. And I think because they also had a sort of ambitious targets for this or ambitious goals for this meeting, so they weren't included.
Earlier this week, you reported that 3 Swiss guards have voluntarily left the Pope's army, and another 3 are on temporary suspension after refusing to comply with the Vatican's COVID vaccine mandate. You also report that as many as 30 guards had been resisting the mandatory vaccine as recently as July. And even the commander of the guards only received the vaccine a few days ago after being threatened. Why is the Vatican coming down so hard on employees regarding this vaccine? And is there any tolerance or discussion of a religious exemption or natural immunity?
Yes, well, they've been in lockstep with the government throughout all of COVID, really, at the Vatican. I mean, they've been following very much what the Italian government has been doing. Of course, they brought in their own Green Pass in August, and now the Vatican's doing the same. But yes, they're being pretty strict about it. Also with the Swiss Guard, who they say, the other militaries around the world also have mandatory vaccinations, and so should the Swiss Guard. But of course, it contravenes the doctrinal notes put out by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith last year, which said that mandatory vaccines shouldn't be allowed; they must be voluntary. So it certainly breaches that. But yes, it's a mystery in a way why the Vatican is being quite so hard about this, especially when it's had no deaths within the Vatican from COVID, and the last case was in October last year, so a year ago.
Wow. Ed, we will leave it there. Thank you for the information, the insight, and of course the great reportage. And you can follow Ed Pentin's reporting at the National Catholic Register. Ed's most recent book, The Next Pope, The Leading Cardinal Candidates, is available now at bookstores everywhere and at the EWTN catalog. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, Raymond.